to connect a region of over 600 new bridges between our lands.
Hello and welcome to ASEAN in Focus. I'm Judy Mera delivering to you the latest news in and around the ASEAN region on today's headlines. Online news outlets Inquirer.net and Rappler may soon be facing libel charges for publishing reports claiming that presidential spokesperson Salvador Panelo recommended or endorsed the granting of executive clemency for convicted rapist murderer, former Calauan Mayor Antonio Sanchez. A French court on Tuesday sentenced the former head of a Thai budget airline to 4 years in jail over a 2007 crash that killed 90 people, nearly two-thirds of them foreigners. Online news outlets Inquirer.net and Rappler may soon be facing libel charges for publishing reports claiming that presidential spokesperson Salvador Panelo recommended or endorsed the granting of executive clemency for convicted rapist murderer, former Calauan Mayor Antonio Sanchez. Panelo, who is also chief of presidential legal counsel, said he will be filing libel complaints against the two news outlets for their malicious reports which are meant to discredit him. But Panelo did not give an exact date when to file the charges. Inquirer.net used the word recommended, while Rappler used the word endorsed when Panelo insisted he only referred the letter to the appropriate agency or department. Because of the words used in the report, Panelo said people are saying now that he really did something about the so-called release. He reiterated that he merely wrote a referral letter to the Board of Pardons and Parole, or BPP, to act on the request of Sanchez's daughter, Marie Antonelvi, to grant her father pardon but never recommended anything. He said he asked both Inquirer.net and Rappler to correct the reports, but they have not tried to do so.
As written by Inquirer.net, this report is far from the truth, and we find it defamatory in nature. There is no part of this representation's official communication asking for intervention. As texted by Pia Rappler, I said no intervention. The referral letter speaks for itself. On the contrary, this representation...
Panelo, who was a former broadcaster himself, said journalists should be writing accurately. He said he did not feel the need to inhibit from writing a referral letter despite being Sanchez's former lawyer, since he was only performing official duties by responding to all letters by referring it to the proper agency or department.
It has been the standard operating procedure of the Office of the Chief Presidential Legal Counsel to respond to all, and I mean all, letters received by it and refer them to the appropriate department or agency which has the authority to act on the writer's concern. Every day.
Panelo also said that it doesn't matter to him because he cannot discriminate, otherwise he will also be accused of discriminating them because he was a former lawyer of 27 years. And I quote, "In the first place, the letter was not even in reference to Republic Act number 10592. It refers to their applying for clemency. RA 10592, or the Good Conduct Time Allowance, or GCTA law, provides new guidelines on how to compute good conduct time, including a 20-day deduction for each month of good behavior during the first 2 years of imprisonment." Meanwhile, Myanmar's civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi has washed her hands of the Rohingya crisis. A UN rights investigator said Tuesday ahead of a meeting between South Korea's President Moon Jae-in and the tarnished democracy icon. Young Hee Lee, a university professor in Seoul who is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights to Myanmar, said Suu Kyi was terribly misguided and misinformed about the abuses against the stateless Muslim minority in her country. The Nobel laureate was under house arrest for years when Myanmar was a military dictatorship before her party won elections in 2015 by a landslide and the first fully free vote for generations. Hopes were high that she would usher in a new era of freedom, but more than 740,000 Rohingya have since been driven out of the Buddhist majority country and into Bangladesh in a 2017 army crackdown. The U.S. in July banned Myanmar's army chief Min Aung Hlaing and other officers for their role in the campaign of ethnic cleansing. Suu Kyi was spared from the sanctions but no longer deserved to be called a democracy activist, Lee told AFP. And I quote, she should step up and really speak out for the treatment that the Rohingya had suffered for decades. She told AFP, it's time for her to speak out and use the word, call them the way they identify themselves as the Rohingya. Myanmar calls the persecuted minority Bengali, treating them as illegal interlopers from Bangladesh and refusing to grant them citizenship or basic rights.
She was a human rights icon, and I think that's something that the international community portrayed her as, but she's a politician. We'll have to see how she will go down in history as a politician or a statesman. I think that she enjoys the popular vote very much, and I think that she should step up and really speak out for the treatment that the Rohingyas had suffered for decades. But our president enjoys a great history of being a human rights lawyer. But I'm afraid that he hasn't been really speaking out for human rights. For people, for instance, 맹목적으로 투자를 한다는 것은 결국 아까 내가 말씀드린 것처럼 우리나라도 my mandate was from 2014. I started when the previous government was.
I don't know from teaching.
I don't know.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So when I got into this mandate.
In other news, a French court on Tuesday sentenced the former head of a Thai budget airline to 4 years in jail over a 2007 crash that killed 90 people, nearly two-thirds of them foreigners. The suit filed by the families of the 9 French victims aboard the flight claimed that crash landing on the resort island of Phuket was an accident waiting to happen. The Paris court found Udom Tanti Prasongchai, the former head of the airline Wantigo, guilty of voluntary manslaughter and also set a fine of 75,000 euros or $82,300. But despite an international warrant for his arrest, Tanti Prasongchai has never been detained and did not respond to the French judicial summons and was tried in absentia. The crash occurred on September 16, 2007, when the Boeing passenger jet carrying 123 passengers and 7 crew skidded off the runway and burst into the flames while trying to land in driving rain and heavy winds. The victims' families accused the airline of trying to cover up a series of failings, which led to the crash, including overworked pilots and falsified flight logs. In its ruling, the court found evidence of mistakes by the pilots, but also faulted the airline, saying the crew did not have the capacity to react correctly because of their fatigue and stress. Among the dead were 33 Thai nationals and 57 foreigners, mainly tourists from Britain, Israel, and France. One of the plaintiffs, Gerard Bembaron, who lost a brother in the crash, hailed a ruling that sends a serious warning to airlines with dubious practices, even if they don't fly in France. French courts are allowed to hear cases involving accidents or attacks anywhere in the world if French citizens are victims. Wantigo and its parent company Orient Thai have both ceased to operate since the crash. Meanwhile, Indonesia is imposing restrictions on foreigners visiting its Restip Papua region, the government said Tuesday after 4 Australians were deported over claims they took part in independence protest. Papua, where a low-level insurgency against Indonesian control has simmered for decades, has seen 2 weeks of mass protests and deadly riots sparked by anger over racism and fresh calls for self-rule. On Tuesday, Indonesia's Chief Security Minister Wiranto said the country would limit foreigners entering its easternmost territory, which has popular beach destinations, over safety concerns and to weed out suspected agitators. It was unclear whether the new restrictions would prevent foreign journalists from going to a region subject to a government-ordered internet shutdown. Since the unrest broke out, a policy slammed by media and free speech advocates, and I quote, "This is to protect foreigners from becoming victims of the riots," Wiranto said. "It's difficult to distinguish between foreigners who are there to provoke and interfere from those who went as tourists," he added. Wiranto also dismissed accusations that the government was dragging its feet on probing claims security forces committed human rights violations, amid unconfirmed reports that the military shot at dead 6 protesters last week. He reiterated Jakarta's position that it was not open to talking about Papuan independence. "The door is closed on dialogue about the referendum," Wiranto said. Indonesia took control of Papua, a former Dutch colony on the island of New Guinea, in the 1960s after an independence vote that was widely seen as being rigged.
When visiting the Philippines, Manila or Quezon City is a popular destination. But oftentimes the hustle and bustle of the city can be more stressful on your vacation. So when you feel the need to reconnect to nature or relax again, there's a beautiful oasis just outside of the city called the Garden at Ciudad de Victoria. Species that you can see here include hydrangea, snapdragon, and stargazers. They're truly beautiful. The gardens at Ciudad de Victoria are so peaceful, tranquil, and beautiful that it's become a haven for young couples and a very popular venue for engagement photos. The next time you want an escape from the big city, the garden at Ciudad de Victoria is a wonderful place to visit.
Welcome back. The Department of Agriculture, or DA, on Monday said it is mulling over the use of more non-tariff measures, or NTMS, such as stringent sanitary and phytosanitary, or SPS, requirements to regulate the entry of imported rice. This is, the DA said, will help farmers cope with the drop in farm gate prices of unhusked rice due to the influx of cheap imports following the effectivity of a law which eased import restrictions. Agriculture Undersecretary Ariel Cayanan said the DA is now looking into the NTMS and other measures that it can implement to deter the entry of more rice imports, bringing down the maximum residue limit or MRL for pesticide content of imported rice to nearly zero and requiring shipments to undergo pest risk analyses are among the NTMS being considered by the DA. Cayanan said the DA may tighten accreditation rules and the issuance of SPS import clearance or IC to interested rice importers by requiring pertinent food safety certifications. Cayanan said the Philippines will not violate any international agreements if the government pushes through with the implementation of stringent requirements. He said the government will do this to ensure that food imports are safe for human consumption and that the local rice industry is protected from pests. Meanwhile, farmers and fishermen in the Ilocos region in Pangasinan received 1.2 billion peso worth of assistance in the form of machines and seeds from the Department of Agriculture, or DA, to boost their productivity. The DA said in a statement on Tuesday that irrigation facilities were also given to farmers and fishermen. They also received extension and training services for rice, corn, high-value crops, livestock, organic agriculture, as well as a host of fisheries programs. And I quote, "Agricultural services and assistance from the DA must be set in place to help farming and fishing communities become globally competitive and resilient amid the challenges and emerging issues of the industry." Agriculture Secretary William Dar said, "Farmers and fishermen in Ilocos Norte received 287 million pesos. Ilocos Sur received 173 million pesos. La Union received 121 million pesos. And Pangasinan received 628 million pesos. The DA said that these interventions are part of the President's initiatives to ensure that government assistance is readily felt by small farmers and fishermen nationwide. This is also in line with the new thinking for agriculture that Dar introduced when he assumed office. Dar said he envisions a food-secure Philippines with prosperous farmers and fishermen. Dubbed as Masaganang Ani at Mataas na Kita, the battle cry of the administration under the DA chief's watch. That is the latest news in the Southeast Asian nations. Stay updated about the ASEAN region. I'm Judith Yamera, and I'm on with 25.
Tamang impormasyon, napapanahon, mula Batanes hanggang taon-taon, di lamang sa bansa, kundi maging sa iba't ibang panig ng mundo. Mga balitang makabuluhan, mga panayam sa kinauukulan, subaybayan. Dito lamang sa Net 25. News, entertainment, technology.
Innovation. Growth with the latest business news and information. We are open for business. Join the conversations to create a more vibrant environment for entrepreneurship. Catch Open for Business every Saturday from 5 to 6 p.m. Open for Business, from vision to action.